Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Highlights podcast. Today we have with us my dear friend, Melissa Agnes. Melissa, it is so good to see your face. You look phenomenal. How are you?
I'm good and back at you. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Well, I haven't seen you in real life like many of us and our dear friends in way too long. In the meantime, I saw you and you had moved from Canada to New York, and now you've moved again you're in Long Island?
I'm in Long Island City. Yeah, not today.
Long
Today I'm
Island.
upstate. I'm upstate for the week, but yeah, Long Island City.
Love it. So you have been making the most of your time in quarantine with projects and new ventures and all kinds of new exciting things. So I'm just so happy that you're here sharing your time with us today. And I have to tell you, your crisis ready book is more relevant right now than ever. I mean, you were busy before COVID, and I can't imagine how much more packed you are now with how relevant your message is to people that are looking to protect their brand and respond to controversy. And all the key learnings and insights that you share in your book are just so important. I loved it. It was such a great read. And for our highlighters, a lot of our listeners, Melissa, as I was explaining to you, a lot of them are their own brand. I mean, they are their own mini publishing empire. And for my direct sellers and my network marketers and my small business entrepreneurs in particular, what I'd love to start off by talking about is if they are finding that their personal brand is a little bit out of their control. So let's say they work for a large organization that maybe got in trouble with the FTC or has a bad stigma attached from past behaviors, and they're starting to open up buying conversations online. Sometimes they're faced with kind of this pre-existing notion of what they stand for and what their story is going to look like. So just to kind of level set this conversation, I mean, where should they start when it comes to thinking about taking the brand that they're working with and making the best choices they can to open up that dialogue for positive discussion when it's maybe a little bit murky sometimes from a brand standpoint?
Yeah, it's challenging because to your point, it's outside of their control. And the brands themselves should actually be equipping viewers with what they need, unfortunately, but that's unfortunately not the case in most cases. So there's a couple things. One, talking about how you are your own personal brand, no matter what. Having a platform where you create a space where people can get to know you, even prior, hopefully, to before you actually have conversations of selling and buying and becoming customers and transactional. That's one thing. So, for example, use myself. I'm CEO and founder of Christ Ready Institute. But long before that, I am Melissa Agnes. I mean, I'm Melissa Agnes personally, but professionally, I'm Melissa Agnes, the brand. And I've always found that because I have a platform and always leveraged a platform and utilized, kind of fostered a platform where I was very clear about who I am, what I stand for, what my methodology is, what my ideology is. When people come to me, they already feel that they know me. So if you are, I'm very much, crisis ready is not crisis management, it's crisis ready, right? So I'm a strong advocate for being proactive and getting ahead of things before they become an issue. So if you can establish your presence and be very clear on what your core values are and make sure that you're always in alignment with those, with your actions, your communications, and set a platform for yourself that when either people can fall back on, you can point people to, or people come to you because they're already aligning, no matter what brand you might sit with or represent, people are coming to you because they align with you, the personal brand. That's extremely powerful. The second piece there would be so in the book and in a lot of the work that I do, I'm constantly helping professionals from every kind of scale look at defining what issue versus crisis is and defining the thresholds that mean an issue will escalate to crisis or a crisis will be de-escalated down to issue and then to non-issue. So looking at that ahead of time, knowing the brands for which you represent or are working with and saying, here's the reality, here's what has happened, or here's what they're known for, or here's what's in potential risks that could be in the news. And really going through issue versus crisis and why. And then the second part of that is understanding, doing what I call a stakeholder mapping exercise, where you're going to put yourself in your customer's shoes through their lens to the most
Yep.
extent possible that you can do this, and anticipate, what do they feel? What do they think? What do they ask? What do they need? And if you do those two exercises congruently, then you can say, here's the reality, here's the impact, here's, the situation, and here's the scale of like when it could go to crisis or why it went to crisis.
Yeah.
Here's my customer. Here's the questions that they're going to have. Here's the emotions they're going to be feeling. How will I, not how do I because it's happening, but how will I respond and address that once after they also know who I am as an individual, and they're coming to me because they align in our core values.
Yep. It's so good. And a lot of the network marketers that are listening will tell you that they spend so much time doing just that. They are polishing their personal brand. They're trying to get inside the mind of their buyer, their pain points, their careabouts. And to the point that sometimes a lot of network marketers, especially on social media, whether it's Instagram or Clubhouse, they won't actually even mention the company they work for. They will rely so heavily on the Melissa Agnes or the Aaron King component that only after initiating that buying conversation and getting into that dialogue around the opportunity or the products, only then do they kind of gently slide in the brand name, because they're afraid that precursor to the conversation is going to kill the opportunity for dialogue. So I love that you're talking about unpacking, number one, what your values are, what you stand for, independent of the institution as an individual. And then secondarily, really doing that work around what your audience cares about and coming from that place of service and not selling. It's so important.
Let me add something, because as you're talking, I'm sitting here, my instinctive reaction, and this is just me as a human, is my question goes to why, if this is how you feel, that you talk, or you can't talk about the brand that you ultimately represent, why are you working with them? Why are you working for them? Right. And I know that that's not a judgment. That's a question that I have in listening to you. And the answers are very complex. The answers are dynamic and they're individual, and they're complex. But my point is that if I'm having the question, then if somebody is in alignment with you and your core values and who you are and what you stand for, and then they feel that there's a disconnect with who you choose to align yourself with professionally, those are one of the questions, or a part of the questions, that you need to anticipate and be preemptive about. And I'm not saying to come out and say, I work with this brand, or I represent this brand, or my products are with this brand, and I know that they're XYZ. But don't do that at all. But it's in, when you get the question, or when somebody alludes to that kind of insinuation or that connection, having a response that addresses that and demonstrates why you are aligned with them. Yeah. So you're then turning and saying, for example, everybody kind of makes, if the organization or the brand made a mistake, but it's also looking at, but here's what they do stand for, and here's why I'm in alignment with them, or here's what they do, XYZ, and this is what I support. And so just preemptively having the answers to those questions, because ultimately, one of the things that I see, one of the biggest failures in crisis management, in leadership, and in communication is wanting to avoid the difficult questions because they're vulnerable and they're uncomfortable, and that's not a space that leaders want to be in. That doesn't mean that they can go unaddressed, because unaddressed by you means fill in the gap by everybody else, that you have no narrative, you're not a contributor to or control of that narrative. So by understanding the questions and the emotions behind them, and finding a way to align that with your core values, which is what is aligning you to your customers on an emotional level, puts you, leaps and bounds ahead in being crisis ready and being able to hopefully start to kind of overcome these challenges that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, if you aren't, like you said, it's so easy to avoid the uncomfortable conversations and bury your head in the sand. And as we've seen, whether it's Buckingham Palace not weighing in on Meghan Markle and Harry's interview with Oprah, or whatever the latest crisis is people aren't weighing in on, silence is not golden. And if they don't provide a narrative, someone else will. It's such a good point.
Silence is a communication. Silence
Yeah.
is a very, very strong communication. And unless that is the communication that you want to have out, that is the narrative that you want, then choose a different way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to something you said earlier. So you were asking about if someone has an organization they're aligned with and they are afraid to associate themselves with that brand because of the stigma or the reputation that has been fostered and facilitated for whatever reason, like you said, complex reasons and layers, mostly with global organizations. So a lot of my listeners are one individual small brand, usually within a field of anywhere from 25,000 to 200,000 consultants around the world, multicultural, global organizations where the narrative is different country to country, the narrative is different platform to platform. And we say complex, we are talking about a very tangled web that has been woven by a lot of these organizations. Why they do align themselves with the organization is complex as well. But for most of them, it's because they truly do believe in the power of the product to improve their lives. And they've seen firsthand what the opportunity can do for them from a work-life balance standpoint, from a sense of control over their own schedules and all these different benefits. So when you talk about them being very clear on how they explain their values. Should they start? So they shouldn't start by saying, I know that you've heard that brand name is XYZ,
No.
because that'll just like cut off their legs at the beginning. So you're saying they need to have an incredible sort of an opening my why statement, right?
Yeah, focus on be able to address the question if it's directly asked, and be able to communicate the answer in addressing the question, but also when you're just communicating. You want to communicate the answer when you're communicating without stating the question, right? But if people have that question, you want to still answer that question, but you don't need to draw upon the negative. And then to your point, Erin, you started with they believe in the product.
Yes.
When you believe in something I believe in the work that I do. I believe with my entire being in the work that I do. And I believe in all of the initiatives that I'm a part of and I'm undertaking. You can feel that from me the second I start talking about it.
Yeah.
And I'm witnessing this as I'm creating community, as I'm founding a company, as I'm leading with police chiefs around the country, like in specific initiatives. I can also feel and see that whether people started off aligning with me, that they believe in the mission and in what we're doing as a result by the end of the conversation. So I'm using me as an example, but the same thing goes. If you believe in something, which we want to do as human beings anyways, right? Like I would feel very badly for people who do things that they don't believe in, because that's just counter to you're pushing against who you are. So when you're in alignment in an aspect of who you are and in your values and in your heart and in your mission or your purpose in the world, that's the thing to lead with. And you will bring other people on board with that through the way that you communicate and the way that you open up about that and share energetically what that is.
Yeah, I love that so much, because what you're essentially saying is control the controllables. I mean, maybe you can't control what everyone's going to think about a global brand with thousands of ambassadors all spewing different narratives across multiple languages and continents, but what you can control is harnessing your sleigh to that soul belief that is what powers you every day. If it powers you, it'll power others. So I love that you're honing in on controlling the controllables, which is at the end of the day, all we can do, especially in some of these scenarios.
And it's so crisis ready is about controlling the controllables, and control is an illusion in life, in crisis, but in life in general, right? We know that. And that said, we can still use that term. So controlling the controllables and being ready for the uncontrollables, so things that are beyond your control.
Yeah.
And that is put very simply, defining those thresholds. When would something be an issue for your life, for your work, for the brand? How would that impact you? When would it be a crisis? What are those thresholds that say this is why it becomes crisis, right? And then also at the same time, putting yourself in your customer's shoes. And if we do that, there's so much that we can anticipate, that we can foresee, and that we can get ahead of simply by taking the time to conduct these exercises and to think through this. and then do everything else that we're talking about in terms of how to address it, how to respond to it, how to respond with it without fully responding, bringing it up or shining the light on it, but shining the light on the values and on the reason why.
Yeah. And I love that in your book too. And if you're a network marketing leader listening to this and you have that all the things anxiety where it's just so complex and it's so overwhelming and there's all these things, what Melissa's book has is a step-by-step framework to allow you to kind of unpack, monster by mini monster, one thing at a time. You kind of work through and you figure out what kind of response is the most effective for you and how you can best prepare and respond to potential and existing crises within your brand, within your personal brand, and within the overarching, enterprise level reputation that is currently in existence. So it's definitely you make it feel very approachable. And I love how you break things down where you're asking the hard questions, but you're like, look, let's just tackle one at a time. And then when you step away, the answer will kind of present itself for you, having gone through the methodology versus trying to just like throw something at it that sounds good and like fingers crossed. So I love the strategic nature of how your method unfolds. So, I guess two questions I have for you. The one question I have for you is there's a part of your book where you talk about how to address, obviously, the haters, which is what this is about. But, I had something happen the other day with my brand where, obviously we all know that when you're posting about politics or religion, you are pushing the red button and you have to prepare yourself for the flurry of lovers and haters and opinions. And if you're going to play in that pond, just you're inviting it at your own risk, right? But I posted something about how in politics, how there are crazy extremists on both sides of the spectrum. And they give all of us like the normal 80% that has beliefs in both corners, like a really bad name. So I didn't say what I believed either way. I just was like, I feel like the crazy people, the extremists on both sides are like controlling this overarching narrative. And most people that I know kind of see a little bit of both in a lot of different areas, and they're giving us a bad name. So I thought it was like the most fair and balanced. It's the only political post I think I've shared in probably like hashtag ever. And I got Melissa, hundreds and hundreds of comments. I would say 90% of everyone was like, amen, yes, I feel seen. Are you at my house? Love this. But then, of course, 10% of those haters went nuts and were like sending me all these horrible messages and bullying and trolls. And so my question is, as a personal brand owner, do you spend time addressing that small percent of haters if it is 50 or 60 people out of the 900 that agreed with you? I mean, at what point do they reach that critical mass or that majority where you have to respond? And is there like a certain percent where you're like, that's just the internet and you just like let it go? I mean, what does that line look like, would you say?
So that is, it's highly circumstantial. So I'm going to respond to your particular scenario.
Okay.
Your particular example. I mean, our mutual friend, Jay Bear, will tell you got to respond to all the haters.
Yeah.
And he's got a great book on it. That said, you have to be crisis ready smart when you do it and strategic. So it depends on the situation entirely. Normally, under kind of the bigger house of generalized statements, I don't believe that anybody is statistically insignificant. So understanding bigger context on, does one relationship matter to you? What's the deeper context of one relationship? How does that align with your values? What does that represent for your brand? How you your viewpoint on that? So there's bigger questions, but that's a generalized normal situation. Your situation is you made a statement in a very controversial sphere.
Yep.
Right? Controversy is divisive by nature, and so therefore segregates. And is on top of that, controversy is very emotional. And considering that you were in the United States and you made a comment about politics in particular, not only is that controversial, not only is that emotionally ingrained in people, but it challenges a lot of self-identity. So we're talking ego, we're talking a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
And the second that somebody's identity feels challenged, you are going to get irrational, a very, yes, that is the perfect word, visceral response. So when you're dealing with controversy, there's a crisis ready formula for that. So in terms of answering your specific question is first understanding that you're dealing with controversy and everything that I just said. And then 2, knowing that when it comes to controversy, if you're going to make a statement, then be very thoughtful and concise with your statement and make sure it aligns with your core values, because that is always your guiding beacon. That is your northern star. Your core values, especially in crisis, is your northern star. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's why I shared it, because one of my core values is tolerance and free speech and seeing both sides. And that's one of my core values is balance and peace and understanding and forgiveness and trying to understand. And so I felt like I was sharing a post that very much anchored with a Northern Star value for me. So anyway, sorry, keep going. I'm just listening.
No,
I'm like,
so that's the answer. You absolutely did that. And that's clear in the fact that you, Erin King, made this statement in the first place, because to your point, you've hashtag never, or, whatever you said, commented on, made a political statement. So you did that. In which case, then you need to own that, know that controversy is polarizing, and that you will never appeal to everybody because it's polarizing. Yeah. So if you've made a statement, that if you've decided to proactively make a statement, which you did, and it aligns with your values, it is clear, it is concise, there's nothing more that you want to say, can't say, it says it all, then you need to be quiet. Yep. Because there's nothing you can do to change the minds or the hearts, or even to resonate with the people who you have challenged in their minds, their self-identity, and have that visceral emotional response. There's nothing you can do to appease them at all, unless it was to go against your core values and agree with them, in which case now you got the other, 90% coming at you.
So everyone listening, do you hear the methodical approach? So she's running everything through the same framework. And this is a framework that when you read her book and learn it, you can have this as this go-to insurance policy, that you are not just knee-jerk reaction. You are methodically going through a set of guideposts that can help you figure out what is the best response for you and have it feel good. Have you not question it as much? And I love that about your book, Melissa. And I think part of the beauty of everyone listening that does have a personal brand, part of the luxury that we have is that freedom to say, one of my favorite taglines is, I'd rather be someone's shot of whiskey than everyone's cup of tea. And that's the beauty of a personal brand.
I've never heard that.
And you're a whiskey drinker, I think, aren't you? You like, so that's a good one for you. You can borrow that. So I think that's what we should be grateful for as personal brand owners, because if you are a large enterprise level institution, you oftentimes do not have that same freedom to make those choices when you are speaking on behalf of thousands of people. So, take that as a beautiful, controllable, that I guess you could say, that we are allowed to carve that out. We are allowed to plug into that, and that, maybe you don't always have to hug every hater if you've gone through this proper framework that Melissa has in her phenomenal book, Crisis Ready. So
thank you. You have to be strategic about it. You have to understand emotion. Yeah, that's what you have to. That's one of the core things, is understanding emotion. And again, if you go, the book talks about that. And there's resources. There's crisis ready formulas for understanding emotion that you can find at crisisreadyinstitute.com.
It's so good. And her Crisis Ready community, I highly recommend. Anyone that's a leader of a team, organizing a team or an organization, needs to definitely check out the Crisis Ready community, which is crisisreadycommunity.com. Very easy. And definitely give Melissa a follow on Instagram. Her content is thoughtful, it's honest, and you're just a great human. I mean, the exact same person that you all are hearing on this podcast is the same person that I have met in real life. And so you're very authentic and true to your values as well, Melissa. So I adore you, and I appreciate you sharing your brilliance with us today. Before I let you go, I know you have a million projects, but super quick, not that you have a ton of time for tons of extra reading, but this is a podcast on books. So are you reading, or have you read anything great lately that you'd like to recommend to our listeners? Here are highlighters.
The Crisis Ready community has a book club. So yes, I'm always reading a book, because the Crisis Ready community has a book club. And we are currently reading the 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World by Fareed Zakaria, which is a phenomenal read. So that's what I'm currently reading, and I highly recommend it. And then we, have conversation around it, which is great.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we will also link to your book club then in the show notes, and I cannot wait to become a member. So, Melissa, you're a joy.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your
Likewise,
time
Erin.
today. Oh, so good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. And thanks to everybody who listened.